The sun beat down on the quiet street in Palm Beach, Florida. The fancy houses with their perfect lawns stretched out in a neat row. On this hot Saturday afternoon in June, most people stayed inside with their air conditioning, but not Lily Carter. Lily was 8 years old with curly brown hair and bright blue eyes. She sat at a small wooden table at the end of her driveway. A large pitcher of fresh lemonade sat on the table next to a stack of paper cups. A hand-painted sign read, "Lily's Lemonade, $1." Lily had been sitting there since 10 in the morning. So far, she had made $7. Her mother, Susan, checked on her every half hour from the front porch. Susan was a nurse who worked night shifts at the local hospital. She had dark circles under her eyes but always managed to smile for her daughter. Their house was small and needed repairs. The paint peeled from the sides and one of the front steps was broken. It stood out among the bigger, nicer homes on the street. "Drink some water, honey, it's hot today," Susan called out. Lily nodded and took a sip from her water bottle. She wiped sweat from her forehead and looked down the street. Something caught her eye. A shiny red car was turning onto their street. It was long and low to the ground with racing stripes down the hood. The engine made a deep, rumbling sound that Lily could feel in her chest. The car slowed down as it approached her lemonade stand. Lily sat up straight and fixed her hair. A new customer was coming. The red Mustang Shelby GT500 pulled up to the curb with a gentle purr. The door opened, and out stepped a man in his mid-40s. He wore expensive sunglasses, a light blue button-up, shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and khaki pants. His watch glinted in the sunlight. He took off his sunglasses and smiled at Lily. "Well, hello there," he said. "Is that lemonade fresh?" Lily nodded. "I made it this morning. My mom helped squeeze the lemons." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. "I'm Richard Grant. I just bought a house down the street, the big white one with the fountain." Lily knew the house. It had been empty for months. It was 3 times bigger than her house and had a swimming pool. "In the backyard, I'm Lily Carter. My lemonade is $1. Richard smiled. "A fair price for a hot day." Lily poured a cup of lemonade for Richard. As she handed it to him, something strange happened. A cold feeling washed over her body. The sounds around her seemed to fade away. In her mind, she saw a flash of images. The red car crushed under something big and dark. The sound of metal crunching, glass breaking. She saw Richard inside the car. Then darkness. Lily gasped and dropped the cup of lemonade. It splashed onto the table and dripped onto the ground. "Whoa there," Richard said, jumping back to avoid the spill. "Are you okay?" Lily stared at Richard, with wide eyes. Her face had gone pale. The images in her head were so real, so scary. She had felt these feelings before. Last year, she had seen her teacher clutching her chest and falling to the ground. 3 days later, Mrs. Benson had a heart attack in the classroom. 6 months ago, Lily dreamed about her uncle's car spinning out of control on a rainy highway. The next day, he called to say he'd been in an accident. Lily knew what these visions meant. Something bad was going to happen to this man in his red car. "Don't get back in your Mustang, mister," Lily said suddenly. Her voice was quiet, but firm. Richard raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? Please don't drive it today," Lily continued. Her hands were shaking. Richard chuckled nervously. "Is this some kind of joke? Did someone put you up to this?" Lily shook her head. "No. I saw something bad happening to that car. In my head. Just now." Richard's smile faded a little. He glanced at his Mustang, then back at Lily. "I think you've been in the sun too long, kiddo." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. He placed it on the table, careful to avoid the spilled lemonade. "Keep the change," he said. "Buy yourself something nice." Richard turned to leave, but Lily jumped up from her chair and grabbed his sleeve. Her small fingers clutched the expensive fabric of his shirt. "I'm serious," she insisted. Her blue eyes locked onto his. "I saw something bad happening to that car in my dream. Please don't drive it today." Richard looked down at Lily's hand on his arm. Then he looked into her eyes. There was something there that made him pause. It wasn't just the fear in her eyes. It was the certainty This wasn't a child playing a prank. She truly believed what she was saying. Susan appeared at the end of the driveway. "Lily, is everything okay?" She walked quickly toward the lemonade stand. Richard gently removed Lily's hand from his sleeve. "Your daughter was just warning me about my car." Susan's face fell. She put her hands on Lily's shoulders. "I'm so sorry if she bothered you. Lily has a big imagination." "Mom, I saw it," Lily insisted. "Like with Uncle Jack and Mrs. Benson." A look passed between mother and daughter. Susan's grip on Lily's shoulders tightened slightly. "I'm sorry, sir," Susan said to Richard. "She doesn't mean any harm." Richard nodded slowly. He looked at his Mustang again. The sun glinted off its polished red surface. He had bought it just 3 weeks ago to celebrate his latest business success. His tech company had just been valued at $350 million, and he had treated himself to the car of his dreams. "No harm done," Richard said. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his stomach. There was something about the girl's warning that bothered him. Back in his car, Richard sat with his hands on the steering wheel. He could see Lily and her mother through the windshield. They were talking, and Susan seemed to be scolding Lily gently. The little girl kept pointing at his car. Richard turned the key in the ignition. The Mustang's powerful engine roared to life, but he didn't put it in drive. Instead, he sat there, thinking about Lily's warning. Richard had always prided himself on being logical. He had built his fortune on making smart, data-driven decisions. He didn't believe in superstitions or psychic predictions. And yet, his grandmother Elaine had claimed to have dreams that came true. When Richard was 10, she had refused to let his family go on a planned boat trip because she had dreamed of rough waters. The boat they would have been on had capsized, and 3 people had drowned. Richard had dismissed it as coincidence. His father had called it Elaine's funny feeling. Richard looked at Lily again. She was still watching him from her lemonade stand. Her face was serious, concerned. "This is ridiculous," Richard muttered to himself. But he pulled out his phone and called his assistant anyway. "Nancy, it's me. Something's come up. I need you to send a car to pick me up. Yes, right now. I'll leave the Mustang parked here for today." Richard wasn't sure why he was doing this. Maybe it was the heat making him act strangely. Maybe it was the memory of his grandmother. Or maybe it was just something in that little girl's eyes that made him think twice. As the Uber pulled away 15 minutes later, Richard looked back at Lily's lemonade stand. She was watching him leave, and he could swear she looked relieved. What Richard Grant didn't know was that his decision to listen to a strange little girl's warning would change both of their lives forever. And before the sun set that day, he would discover that sometimes the most important messages come from the most unexpected sources. Richard sat in the back of the Uber staring at his phone. He scrolled through his emails but couldn't focus on the words. His mind kept returning to the little girl at the lemonade stand. Lily Carter. Her blue eyes had looked so serious when she warned him not to drive his Mustang. "Everything okay back there?" the Uber driver asked, glancing at Richard in the rearview mirror. "Yes, fine," Richard said. He put his phone away and looked out the window. They were driving through downtown Palm Beach now. People walked along the sidewalks, enjoying the sunny day. Everything seemed normal. Richard felt foolish for letting a child's words affect him so much. The Uber dropped him off at his office building. Grant Technologies took up the top 3 floors. Richard had started the company 10 years ago in his garage. Now it employed over 200 people and was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Nancy Keller, Richard's assistant, met him at the elevator. She was in her 50s with short gray hair and glasses. She had been with Richard since the beginning. "I was surprised by your call," Nancy said as they walked to his office. "You love driving that car." Richard sat down at his desk and sighed. Something strange happened. A little girl at a lemonade stand told me not to drive my car today. She said she saw something bad happening to it. Nancy raised her eyebrows. "And you listened to her?" Richard ran a hand through his hair. I know it sounds crazy, but there was something about the way she said it, like she really saw something. Nancy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It reminds me of the stories you told me about your grandmother. Elaine, right? The one who had those dreams?" Richard looked up at Nancy. He had almost forgotten that he'd told her about his grandmother's so-called gift. Elaine had claimed to see things before they happened. The family had called it her funny feeling. "That's different," Richard said. "My grandmother was, well, she was just superstitious." "Maybe," Nancy said. "Or maybe she was like that little girl." Richard shook his head. He was being silly. He was a man of science and logic. He didn't believe in psychic visions or premonitions. "I have the charity gala tonight," Richard said, changing the subject. "Did the tuxedo arrive?" Nancy nodded. "It's hanging in your private bathroom. The gala starts at 7. Your speech is at 8. Richard tried to focus on work for the rest of the day. He had meetings with his development team and a video call with investors, but his mind kept drifting back to Lily Carter and her warning. At 6 o'clock, Richard changed into his tuxedo. The charity gala was for the Palm Beach Children's Hospital. Richard's company had donated $5 million to help build a new cancer treatment wing. As he adjusted his bow tie in the mirror, Richard's phone rang. It was Pete Daniels, the security guard from his neighborhood. "Mr. Grant? It's Pete from Ocean View Estates." "Yes, Pete. What can I do for you?" There was a pause. On the line. "Sir, there's been an incident on Palmetto Drive. That's where you left your car today, right? The red Mustang?" Richard's heart skipped a beat. "Yes. What happened?" "One of the big oak trees fell across the road. It just came down without any warning. Nobody was hurt, but what?" Richard's mouth felt dry. "Your car, sir. The tree landed right on it. I'm sorry to tell you, but the Mustang is totaled." Richard sat down heavily on a chair. A strange mixture of shock and relief washed over him. "The car is destroyed?" "Yes, sir. Completely crushed. Fire department is here now trying to clear the road. Police too. It's a mess." "I'll be right there," Richard said. He ended the call and stared at the phone in his hand. The little girl had been right. If he had been in his car, Richard called for another Uber. He texted Nancy to tell her he would be late for the gala. Then he sat in stunned silence as the Uber drove him back to Palmetto Drive. The scene was chaotic when he arrived. Police, cars and fire trucks blocked the road. Their flashing lights lit up the evening sky. A huge oak tree lay across the street. Its massive trunk and branches covered the area where Richard had parked his Mustang. He could just see a bit of red metal sticking out from under the tree. Officer Judy Miller approached him. "Mr. Grant, I'm Officer Miller. Pete told me you were coming." Richard nodded. "That's my car under there." Officer Miller led him closer to the scene. Firefighters were cutting through branches with chainsaws. The noise was deafening. "The tree must have been weakened by the storms last week," Officer Miller shouted over the noise. "It just gave way, no warning at all." When they got close enough, Richard could see what was left of his Mustang. The tree had crushed the roof completely. The driver's seat where Richard would have been sitting was flattened. The windshield was shattered. The hood was crumpled like a piece of paper. "If anyone had been inside," Officer Miller said, letting the words hang in the air. Richard felt sick. If he had ignored Lily's warning, if he had driven his car today, he would have been killed. "You're lucky you weren't in it," Officer Miller said. "Lucky isn't the word," Richard replied quietly. "Someone warned me." Officer Miller looked at him curiously, but Richard didn't explain further. It took the firefighters 3 hours to cut away enough of the tree to move what was left of the Mustang. Richard stayed and watched the whole process. He was supposed to be at the charity gala, giving a speech about helping children. Instead, he was standing in the dark, watching his dream car being towed away as scrap metal. And he was grateful. Because a little girl named Lily Carter had saved his life. As the tow truck drove away with the crushed remains of his Mustang, Richard made a decision. He needed to talk to Lily again. He needed to understand what had happened. Richard walked back to his temporary rental house in Ocean View Estates. It was almost midnight, too late to visit Lily now. But first thing in the morning, he would go back to that lemonade stand. He had questions that needed answers. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the crushed car in his mind. He kept hearing Lily's voice. "Don't get back in your Mustang, mister. Please don't drive it today." How had she known? Was it just a lucky guess? A coincidence? Or was it something more? Richard thought about his grandmother Elaine again. She had always claimed that her dreams showed her glimpses of the future. The family had humored her but never really believed her. Richard had been the most skeptical of all. He had always thought there was a logical explanation for her predictions. But now, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, Richard wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe there were things in this world that couldn't be explained by science or logic. Maybe some people, like his grandmother and like Lily Carter, could see things that others couldn't. The clock on his bedside table showed 3:17 a.m. when Richard finally drifted off to sleep. He dreamed of falling trees and crushed metal. He dreamed of a little girl with blue eyes who tried to tell him something important, something he couldn't quite hear. When the sun rose the next morning, Richard was already awake. He showered and dressed quickly. He had to see Lily again. He had to thank her for saving his life, and he had to find out how she knew what was going to happen. As Richard walked down Palmetto Drive toward Lily's house, he passed the spot where his car had been crushed. City workers were cleaning up the last of the debris. The massive oak tree was gone, cut into pieces and hauled away. Only a stump remained to show where it had stood for probably 100 years before falling on exactly the wrong day at exactly the wrong time, or, from Richard's perspective, exactly the right day, because he hadn't been in his car when the tree fell, because he had listened to a little girl's warning. Richard approached the small house with the peeling paint and the broken front step. He wondered if Lily would be at her lemonade stand today. He wondered what he would say to her. How do you thank someone for saving your life with a warning that shouldn't have been possible? Richard took a deep breath and walked up the driveway. Richard walked up to the small house with the peeling paint. No lemonade stand sat in the driveway today. He took a deep breath and knocked on the front door. His heart beat fast in his chest. What would he say to the little girl who had somehow known his car would be crushed? The door opened and Susan Carter stood there in blue nurse's scrubs. Dark circles lined her eyes. She looked tired, like she had just woken up. She blinked in surprise when she saw Richard. "Oh, you're the man from yesterday. The one with the red car," she said. "Yes, my name is Richard Grant. I was hoping to speak with Lily." Susan frowned slightly. "She's at school. Is everything okay?" Richard hesitated. "Actually, something happened yesterday. Something Lily warned me about." He pointed down the street. "A tree fell on my car. The car Lily told me not to drive. If I had been in it." Susan's face went pale. She gripped the door frame. "Oh my God," she whispered. "May I come in?" Richard asked. "I'd like to understand what happened, how Lily knew." Susan looked at Richard for a long moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Please, come in." The inside of the house was small but clean. The furniture was old and worn. Pictures of Lily hung on the walls. Richard saw a small table in the corner with school books piled on it. A child's drawings were stuck to the refrigerator with magnets. "Would you like some coffee?" Susan asked. "I just made a pot. I work night shifts at the hospital, so I'm just getting up." "Coffee would be great, thank you," Richard said. Susan poured 2 cups of coffee. Her hands shook slightly. They sat at the kitchen table, and Susan took a deep breath. "Lily has been having these visions since she was 4 years old," she said quietly. "The first time it happened, she woke up crying in the middle of the night. She said Grandpa was sick. The next day, my father had a stroke." Richard listened without interrupting. Susan continued. "When she was 6, she knew her teacher was going to get hurt before it happened. Mrs. Benson had a heart attack right in the classroom. Lily had warned me that morning that something bad would happen to her teacher. Susan got up and walked to a drawer. She pulled out a folder and placed it on the table. Inside were dozens of drawings. Children's drawings done with crayons and markers. Susan spread them out. Lily draws what she sees in her visions, Susan explained. This one is from last year. The drawing showed a blue car upside down. Next to it was a stick figure with its leg colored red. This was my brother Jack's car accident. He flipped his car on the highway and broke his leg. Lily drew this 3 days before it happened. Richard picked up one of the drawings. It showed a tree falling on what looked like a red car. The date in the corner was from 2 weeks ago. She saw my accident 2 weeks ago, Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Susan nodded. She's been having more visions lately. They're getting stronger. She doesn't understand what's happening to her. It scares her. Do other people know about this? Susan shook her head. Just family. I've taken her to doctors, but they don't believe me. They say it's just a child's imagination. One doctor even suggested I was making it up for attention. Susan's voice cracked. I've tried to protect her. I don't want people thinking she's strange. Richard set down his coffee cup. I would have died yesterday if she hadn't warned me. Your daughter saved my life. Tears filled Susan's eyes. She hates it, she whispered. She hates seeing bad things before they happen. She says it feels cold like ice inside her head. Sometimes she cries for hours afterward. Richard thought about what it must be like for an 8-year-old girl to see terrible things before they happened. To know that people would get hurt, but not always be able to stop it. It must be a heavy burden for such small shoulders. What time does Lily get home from school? He asked. Around 3:30, Susan said. The school bus drops her off at the corner. Richard looked at his watch. It was only 10 in the morning. Would it be okay if I came back then? I'd like to thank her. Susan nodded. I think she'd like that. She was worried about you all night. She kept asking if I thought you had listened to her warning. Richard stood up to leave. I'll come back this afternoon. As he reached the door, Susan called after him. Mr. Grant, there's something else you should know. Lily doesn't just see bad things. Sometimes she sees good things too. Last month she told me I would get a letter with good news. The next day I got accepted into a nursing program I'd applied for. A chance to get a better job. Richard smiled. That's good to hear. I'll see you this afternoon, Ms. Carter. Please call me Susan. Richard walked back to his rental house. His mind raced with questions. How was it possible for a child to see the future? What did it mean? Was it some kind of sixth sense? Was it like his grandmother's funny feelings? He spent the next few hours researching on his laptop. He read about precognition, the ability to see future events. He read about children who claimed to have psychic abilities. Some scientists said it was impossible. Others said there were things about human consciousness that science still didn't understand. At 3:15, Richard walked back to the Carter house. He stood at a distance and watched as a yellow school bus stopped at the corner. A small figure, in a blue dress and a backpack, stepped off the bus. Lily walked slowly down the sidewalk, dragging her feet a little. She looked like any normal 8-year-old after a long day at school. When she spotted Richard standing near her house, she stopped. Then she broke into a run. You're okay, she said as she reached him. You listened to me. Richard knelt down so he was at eye level with her. Yes, I listened. And I'm very glad I did. My car was crushed by a fallen tree yesterday. Lily nodded solemnly. I saw it, in my head. I saw the tree falling on your red car. I saw it break. You saved my life, Lily. I came here to say thank you. Lily looked down at her shoes. Most grown-ups don't listen to me. Well, I'm glad I did, Richard said. Your mom told me about your other visions, about your grandfather and your teacher. Lily's face fell. I don't like seeing bad things. It makes me feel sick. I can imagine it would, Richard said gently. They walked together to the house. Susan was waiting at the door. She had changed out of her scrubs into jeans and a t-shirt. How? Was school today? She asked Lily. Okay, we had a math test. I got an A. That's wonderful, Susan said, smiling at her daughter. Inside, Lily put her backpack on the table and took out her school books. Richard noticed that one corner of the table wobbled. The house had many small things that needed fixing. A crack in the ceiling. A tear in the sofa cushion covered with a throw blanket. Signs of a family getting by on a tight budget. "Would you like some juice, Mr. Grant?" Lily asked formally. "Yes, thank you," Richard said, hiding a smile at her grown-up manners. As Lily went to the kitchen, Richard turned to Susan. "May I ask you something? How do you manage raising Lily on your own?" Susan sighed. "It's not easy. I work night shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide. The pay isn't great, but it lets me be home when Lily gets back from school. I'm trying to get my nursing degree to make more money, but the classes are expensive." Richard nodded. He thought about his own life, his big empty house, his crushed sports car that had cost more than Susan probably made in 2 years. The millions in his bank account. Lily returned with a glass of orange juice for Richard. "Lily," Richard said carefully, "I'd like to ask you some questions about your visions. Is that okay?" Lily looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Okay," Lily said. She sat down at the table across from Richard. "When did you first start seeing things before they happened?" Richard asked. "When I was little," Lily said. "I saw Grandpa get sick before it happened." "And how does it feel when you have a vision?" Lily thought for a moment. "Cold, like ice water inside my head, and everything gets quiet, like someone turned down the sound. Then I see pictures in my mind. Can you make them happen? The visions?" Lily shook her head. "No. They just come. Sometimes when I touch people, sometimes in my dreams." Richard took a sip of his juice. "Yesterday, when you warned me about my car, you had a vision when you handed me the lemonade?" "Yes. When our hands touched, I saw your red car getting smashed by the big tree. It was scary." Richard sat back in his chair. He had come here seeking answers, but he found himself with even more questions. One thing was clear, though. Lily Carter was special, and her gift had saved his life. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows through the windows of the small house, Richard knew that his life had changed forever. Not just because he had escaped death, but because he had met a little girl who could see the future, and he knew with sudden certainty that he needed to help her. Over the next few days, Richard found himself thinking about Lily and Susan constantly. He couldn't get their story out of his head. A single mother working night shifts to support her daughter, a little girl with an extraordinary gift that she saw as a burden, a small house with peeling paint and a broken front step. Richard's own life seemed empty in comparison. His big house in Ocean View Estates felt too quiet, too perfect. His office at Grant Technologies buzzed with activity, but the work that had once excited him now seemed less important. On Friday morning, Richard called Nancy into his office. "I need you to set up a meeting with Dr. Alan Foster," Richard said. "He's a professor of parapsychology at the university." Nancy raised an eyebrow. "Parapsychology? That's a change from your usual meetings with tech investors." Richard smiled. "I'm exploring some new interests. May I ask what this is about?" Nancy asked as she made a note in her tablet. Richard hesitated. "It's about the little girl I told you about. The one who warned me about my car." Nancy's eyes widened. "The one who saved your life? What about her?" "She has abilities. She can see things before they happen. I want to understand how that's possible." Nancy nodded slowly. "Like your grandmother?" "Yes," Richard admitted. "Maybe like my grandmother." That afternoon, Richard met with Dr. Foster in his office at the university. The professor was in his 60s with a gray beard and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Precognition is a fascinating field, Mr. Grant," Dr. Foster said after Richard explained the situation, keeping Lily's name private. "Some people dismiss it as pseudoscience, but there are documented cases throughout history of individuals who appear to have the ability to see future events." "How is it possible?" Richard asked. Dr. Foster leaned back in his chair. "There are many theories. Some scientists believe it might be related to quantum physics, the idea that time isn't as linear as we perceive it. Others think some individuals may be sensitive to subtle environmental cues that most of us miss. The brain makes connections and predictions that manifest as visions. And what do you think? Dr. Foster smiled. I think we know far less about the human mind than we like to admit. Consciousness itself is still a mystery to science. I believe some people, especially children, can access parts of consciousness that most adults have shut down. Richard thought about Lily's description of her visions, the cold feeling, the way everything got quiet, the pictures in her head. Is there a way to study these abilities? Richard asked. To understand them better? Yes, but it requires careful, ethical research and funding. Dr. Foster gave Richard a pointed look. Research in this field isn't exactly a priority for most scientific grants. Richard nodded thoughtfully. What if funding wasn't an issue? Dr. Foster's eyes lit up. Then we could establish a proper research program, study individuals with these gifts in a supportive environment, help them understand and manage their abilities. As Richard left the university, an idea began to form in his mind. He had the resources to help Lily. He had the money, the connections, but would Susan allow it? Would she trust him with her daughter's secret? That evening, Richard drove to the Carter house. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. Susan's old car was in the driveway. Richard parked on the street and walked up to the door. Lily answered his knock. Her face brightened when she saw him. Mr. Grant, Mom, it's Richard, she called over her shoulder. Susan appeared behind her daughter. She looked surprised to see Richard again. Mr. Grant, this is unexpected. Please call me Richard. I was hoping to talk to both of you about something important. Susan invited him in. Lily was working on homework at the kitchen table. Math problems spread across an open notebook. I've been thinking a lot about Lily's gift, Richard said after Susan had made coffee for them. I've been talking to people who study these kinds of abilities. Susan's face grew concerned. You didn't tell anyone about Lily, did you? No, of course not, Richard assured her. I kept everything confidential, but I've learned that there are researchers who study precognition, the ability to see future events, serious scientists at universities. And? Susan asked cautiously. And I think I can help, Richard said. I want to establish a research foundation focused on studying these abilities, a place where Lily and others like her could be understood, not dismissed or treated like they're crazy. Lily looked up from her homework. There are other kids like me? Richard smiled at her. Yes, I believe there are, and they probably feel just as confused and scared as you sometimes do. Susan set down her coffee cup. That sounds nice, but why would you do this? You barely know us. Richard met her eyes. Because your daughter saved my life. Because I've seen what she can do and I believe her. And because I have the resources to make a difference. He hadn't planned to say what came next, but the words tumbled out anyway. My grandmother had visions too. The family never took her seriously. We called them her funny feelings. But she was right again and again, and none of us ever tried to understand what was happening to her. Susan was quiet for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? I want to create the Precognitive Research Foundation, Richard explained. Fund legitimate scientific research, bring together experts in neuroscience, psychology, even quantum physics, study these abilities in a supportive environment, and I want Lily to be part of it if you're both comfortable with that. Would I have to leave school? Lily asked, worry in her voice. No, absolutely not, Richard said. You would just visit the research center sometimes, maybe after school or on weekends. Talk to the scientists. Maybe do some simple tests with them, nothing scary or harmful. Susan looked skeptical. This sounds expensive. Richard smiled. I can afford it. Why haven't I heard of you before? If you have that kind of money. I try to keep a low profile, Richard said. But my company, Grant Technologies, is quite successful. You can look it up. Susan pulled out her phone and typed something. Her eyes widened as she read. "You're worth a lot," Richard finished for her. "More money than I could spend in a lifetime. And I'd like to use some of it to help Lily and others like her." Lily had gone back to her homework, seemingly less interested in talk of money than the adults were. "There's something else," Richard said more quietly. "I noticed that you're working night shifts and trying to finish your nursing degree." Susan's face flushed. "We manage fine." "I'm sure you do," Richard said quickly. "But I'd like to help with that too. A scholarship for your nursing program. No strings attached." "We don't need charity," Susan said, her voice tight. Richard nodded. "It's not charity, it's a thank you. Your daughter saved my life, how can I put a price on that?" Susan glanced at Lily, who was erasing something in her notebook with great concentration. "And what about the house?" Richard continued gently. "I noticed the front step is broken, the paint is peeling, I could help with repairs." "Why are you doing this?" Susan asked again. "Really?" Richard thought about his empty house, his crushed car, the millions in his bank account that brought him no real joy. "Because I want to make a difference," he said simply. "Because I believe Lily has an extraordinary gift that should be understood, not feared, and because helping you both feels like the right thing to do." Susan looked at her daughter again. "Can we think about it? This is a lot to take in." "Of course," Richard said. "Take all the time you need." As Richard stood to leave, Lily suddenly looked up from her homework. Her face went pale, her eyes unfocused, staring at something only she could see. "Lily." Susan was at her side immediately. "What is it, honey?" "I see," Lily whispered. "I see a building. A big building with glass windows. People are working. Inside. They're studying kids like me." Richard and Susan exchanged a shocked look. "And you're there," Lily continued, pointing at Richard. "And Mom is there too. She's wearing a white coat. She looks happy." Then, as quickly as it had come, the vision passed. Lily blinked and looked around, confused by the expressions on the adults' faces. "What?" she asked. Susan knelt beside her daughter. "You just had a vision, sweetheart, about the future." "Was it a bad one?" Lily asked worriedly. Susan smiled, tears in her eyes. "No, honey. I think it was a good one." Richard stood frozen by the door. He had just witnessed Lily's gift firsthand, and she had seen a future where his idea became reality. A research center, Susan working there presumably as a nurse, a place where children like Lily could be understood and helped. "I'll call you tomorrow," Richard said softly. "We can talk more then." As he walked back to his car, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose, meaning, a chance to do something truly important with his wealth and influence. All because a little girl had warned him not to drive his Mustang. 3 months passed quickly. The summer heat gave way to the cooler days of fall. Leaves turned orange and red on the trees that lined Palmetto Drive, and the lives of Lily Carter, Susan Carter, and Richard Grant changed in ways none of them could have imagined. The small house with the peeling paint had been transformed. New paint in a soft yellow color brightened the outside. The broken front step was fixed. Inside, the wobbly kitchen table had been replaced. The crack in the ceiling was repaired. New furniture filled the living room, but the biggest changes were happening elsewhere. On a bright October morning, Richard stood in front of a large glass building just outside of Palm Beach. The sign on the front read, "Precognitive Research Foundation." Richard adjusted his tie nervously. Today was the official opening day. Next to him stood Susan, wearing a crisp white lab coat over a blue dress. Her hair was styled, and she looked more rested than she had 3 months ago. She was no longer working night shifts at the hospital. Instead, she had accepted Richard's offer to be the foundation's head nurse while she finished her nursing degree with a full scholarship. Lily stood between them in a new purple dress, her hair in neat braids. She held both their hands as they faced the building she had seen in her vision months ago. "Are you ready?" Richard asked them both. Lily nodded. Susan squeezed his hand. Inside, the building buzzed with activity. Scientists in lab coats moved from room to room. Computer screens displayed brain scans and data charts. In a large, comfortable room filled with toys and books, 3 children played while researchers observed them through a one-way mirror. "These are the other kids like me?" Lily asked, peering into the room. "Yes," Richard said. "We found them through Dr. Foster's research network. That's Max, he's 10. He knows when the phone will ring before it does. And that's Emma, she's 9. She dreams about things before they happen, just like you sometimes do. And Diego is 7. He can tell what card you're holding without seeing it." Lily watched the children with wide eyes. "They're really like me." "Yes," Susan said, kneeling beside her daughter. "And now none of you have to feel alone or different." Dr. Foster approached them, smiling widely. The professor had been the first person Richard had hired for the foundation. "Everything is ready for the press conference, Mr. Grant," Richard nodded. In a few minutes, he would stand before news cameras and reporters to announce the opening of the Precognitive Research Foundation. He would explain their mission, to study and understand the gift of precognition through serious scientific research, to help children with these abilities learn to manage them, to change the way the world thought about psychic phenomena. But first, he had something to show Lily and Susan. "Come with me," he said, leading them down a hallway to a door marked Special Projects. Inside was a large room with comfortable chairs and a small table. The walls were painted a soothing blue color. Child-friendly art supplies sat on shelves. "This is your special room, Lily," Richard explained. "A safe place where you can talk about your visions, where you can draw what you see if you want to. Dr. Foster and the other scientists will work with you here, but only when you feel comfortable." Lily walked around the room, touching the chairs and looking at the art supplies. "It's nice," she said simply. "And there's one more thing," Richard said. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small box wrapped in purple paper, Lily's favorite color. "This is for you." Lily opened the gift carefully. Inside was a beautiful journal with a purple cover. "This is a special journal," Richard explained. "When you have a vision, you can write about it or draw it here. The pages are coded with tiny dots that can be scanned into our computer system. That way we can keep track of your visions and see if they come true." "Like a science experiment?" Lily asked. Richard smiled. "Exactly like a science experiment. But you're in charge. You decide what to share and when." Susan watched with tears in her eyes. "I never thought," she began, then stopped, too emotional to continue. Richard understood. For years, Susan had struggled alone to help her daughter understand her strange gift. She had faced disbelief from doctors, had worried about Lily being labeled or bullied, and now, Lily was in a place where her ability was valued, studied, respected. A knock at the door interrupted them. Nancy poked her head in. "It's time for the press conference, Richard." As they walked toward the main lobby where the reporters waited, Richard thought about how much had changed. He had not replaced his crushed Mustang. Instead, he drove a safe, practical electric car. His focus had shifted from making more money to using his wealth for something meaningful. He had bought a smaller house, closer to the foundation building. His days were now filled with meetings with scientists, not tech investors. At night, he often had dinner with Susan and Lily, who had become like family to him. The lobby was filled with reporters and cameras. Richard stepped up to the podium, with Susan and Lily standing beside him. Dr. Foster and the other scientists lined up behind them. "Thank you all for coming," Richard began. "Today marks the opening of the Precognitive Research Foundation, an organization dedicated to the scientific study of precognition, the ability to perceive future events before they occur." As he spoke, Richard saw the skeptical looks on some of the reporters' faces. He understood their doubt. 3 months ago, he would have been skeptical too. "Some of you may wonder why a successful tech entrepreneur would invest millions in this field," Richard continued. "The answer is simple. My life was saved by a child with the gift of precognition." He looked down at Lily, who smiled up at him. "This young lady warned me not to drive my car on a day when a tree fell and crushed it. If I had been inside that car, I would have died. The reporters murmured and scribbled notes. I could not explain how she knew, but I could not deny that she did know, and that experience opened my mind to possibilities I had never considered before. Richard explained the Foundation's goals: to study precognition through rigorous scientific methods, to support children with these abilities, to publish peer-reviewed research that would bring legitimacy to a field often dismissed as superstition. After the press conference, as the reporters left and the staff returned to work, Richard, Susan, and Lily stood together looking out the large windows of the Foundation building. "Do you think people will believe us?" Lily asked. Richard knelt down to her level. "Some will, some won't. But we're going to collect so much evidence that eventually they'll have to take notice." "And until then?" Susan asked. "Until then, we help the children who need us. We do good science. And we remember that some things in this world can't be easily explained, but that doesn't make them any less real." As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows of the Precognitive Research Foundation, Richard thought about the strange path that had led him here. A chance stop at a lemonade stand. A warning from a little girl with a remarkable gift. A tree that fell at exactly the right time to change the course of his life forever. Richard had always believed in making his own luck, in controlling his own destiny through hard work and smart decisions. But now he understood that there were forces at work in the universe that couldn't be controlled or even fully understood. Lily took his hand. "I had another vision last night," she said. "What did you see?" Richard asked. "I saw lots of kids here. More than now. And I saw you on TV talking about the Foundation. People were listening to you." Richard smiled. "That sounds like a good vision." "It was," Lily said. "It didn't feel cold like the bad ones. It felt warm." Susan put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Maybe that's how we can tell the difference. Cold for warnings, warm for good news." Richard nodded. It was a theory, one of many they would test in the coming years. As they walked together toward the exit, Richard realized that in trying to understand Lily's gift, he had received a gift of his own, a purpose greater than making money, a chance to make a real difference in the world, and a new family bound together not by blood but by something perhaps even stronger, a belief in possibilities, all because a little girl had warned him, "Don't get in your Mustang," and he had listened.